if you can't regulate your own emotion, if you're worried about dealing with your own internal stuff, it's really hard to take that next step into social awareness and social regulation, which are the last few parts. You can't really get a good vibe and read on everybody else on what's going on if you're struggling with your own issues.
That's right. And Dave, if our listeners are wondering, how do you find out what your emotional intelligence is? Well, you take an assessment, something that can measure that. And that's something, of course, we handle. But the key is, if you don't know where you're going, you're probably going to find that any road is going to get you there. So the key is to know where you are, where your strengths are when it comes to your emotional quotient, and be able to develop a strategy to improve it. And that's where we can start with a good assessment to get you started on that.
Yeah. And you find out for yourself first, because it starts with the leader. It starts with you as the business owner, as the leader.
Yes.
But then find out for your team too.
Yes.
You know, where's your team at? You know, what are the things, and then that even goes into their communication style, what drives them from a different type of, from Spranger's motivational perspective versus this intrinsic motivation. But, you know, looking at all those pieces and really get a good idea and handle on where your team is at. And say you can't fix it if you don't know it's broke, or you can't make improvements if you don't know where you're at.
That's right.
If you don't measure it, if you don't know where you're at, it's hard to go. So there's a couple questions you can ask, especially because, like I said, when we struggle with our own motivation, it's very difficult to expend any energy towards others, especially when it comes to empathy.
Yes.
Now, Daniel Goleman with emotional intelligence, he actually phrased the term that we use in the assessment, social awareness. He calls it as being empathy. And so that's where it talks about if you can't expend energy into empathy, or we call it social awareness, if you're struggling with your own motivation. But here's a couple of questions that I wanted to leave you all with.
Yes.
When things aren't going your way, how does it affect you? Just ask yourself, okay? Also ask yourself, how would you feel if you're working exceptionally hard, working your tail off, but weren't receiving adequate compensation or adequate recognition? Not above and beyond, but even just baseline, what you should. What would you do about it? It's something to think about. Also, can you think of a time when you should have persisted, but you didn't? Or, flip side of the coin, can you think of a time when you persisted and it paid off? Ask yourself, what are your goals in life? You know, what are your passions in life? Do they line up with your career? Sometimes they do, sometimes they don't. You know, do your passions go beyond money and recognition? You know, why are you working where you're working? Why are you doing what you're doing? Sometimes it's just for survival. Sometimes it's those line up. And then the last thing is this: how would a greater level of motivation and persistence affect your decision-making ability? And so just being a little self-reflective and looking at those questions beforehand can go a long way to say, how would I react if, and what about when this comes up? And it almost kind of like a feedback that goes back into the self-awareness and self-regulation, just by being a little introspective about these questions here on motivation. Like I said, to reiterate, motivation is essential for empathy and for social awareness, which is what we're going to talk about in the next episode. So what do we want to leave our listeners with when it comes to motivation?
Well, to recognize that it's an important part of the 5 parts for emotional intelligence is something that you, like all of these, all 5 sections that we're talking about, they can be improved upon. You need to know what they are to begin with, so a good assessment will help you with that. But from there, once you get into the debriefing, you can actually come up with a strategy to guide you in your quest to improve yourself in that area. So what we're saying is, we got more to talk about in future episodes, but emotional quotient is extremely important, and we need to know what ours is and what we can do to improve it.
Yeah. So if you want to increase your motivation, the motivation of your team, increase your self-awareness, increase your self-regulation as far as your emotions, and that will help you stay focused, stay on task, make forward progress, and really help with that internal intrinsic motivation.
That's it.
All right. So thank you guys for listening to Business Smarts Radio with Tom and Dr. Dave. And we will see you for our next episode of the 3 Eyes of EQ. Take care.